Is Jarrod Bowen actually injured? Is it time to sell Heung-min Son? And is it finally time to call Cole Palmer essential? So welcome back after the international break. For those of you who are new to the channel and new to this format, what I'm doing basically is 60 seconds per player to rate and rank whether or not these players are anywhere from essential, i.e. 5 stars, all the way down to a must sell or completely avoid for the time being, which would be 1 star. So to kick us off with Brian Mbeumo today, let's start that clock now. And as you can see, the fixtures over the next 5 on paper don't look actually that fantastic. However, when you start digging into them, I think they become a lot better. Arsenal first up is not the easiest fixture. In fact, they're probably the most difficult defence to go up against. But after that, Luton at home, Brighton away, Sheffield United away, and Aston Villa at home, all 4 of those teams, even including Brighton and Aston Villa, are shipping goals at the moment. And Brian Mbeumo, with the underlying data he's got backing him up at the moment this season, is a fantastic purchase at 6.8 million. He is owned by just under a quarter of the game, so he's not a massive differential, but that underlying data matched with the fact that he is on penalties, he is returning points. If Jarrod Bowen is indeed injured, he could be the perfect replacement. If not this week, definitely next week. With all of that in mind, I'm going to rate him 4 stars out of 5. It would be 5 stars if not for the Arsenal game, but next week onwards, I expect him to be the full 5 stars. So, Son Heung-min obviously hasn't looked too fantastic over the last 2 game weeks. He is still an absolutely elite striker, and playing out of position as a midfielder up front is always going to be a pretty interesting option to own in FPL. However, Spurs are starting to struggle to create those chances a little bit. The fixtures coming aren't fantastic, and I think overall he's probably not the best player to own for that price at the moment, considering the other options available. The underlying data has dropped off a fair bit. He's still hovering at about 0.6 XGI per 90, which is still really good, but over the last 2 game weeks that has started to dip a little bit in parallel with the fact that Maddison has been out injured too. So Aston Villa first up is a pretty good game for Son Heung-min. I think that is probably the litmus test. If he survives that, if he does well in that game, I think you can probably hold him for the remainder. However, if he still looks like he's struggling against Aston Villa, despite the fact that they are going to play with that high line and he should get in behind, then I think he's probably a sell. For the time being, I'm going to put him down as 3 stars out of 5. I don't think you do anything with him this week. You certainly don't buy him, and he could arguably even be a captain option against Aston Villa. But after this game week, if he does struggle this week, I think he's probably a sell. Mitoma is a player that I'm going to judge fairly harshly in this video, and it's not because he's not a good pick. At 0.5 XGI per 90, he's still ticking along really nicely, but his returns have started to dry up a little bit at the moment, and Brighton don't look like they're at their full firing best. The other thing to consider is the fixture run isn't fantastic. Nottingham Forest away from home on paper is green, but they are a very good team at home, and then it's Chelsea away after that. So the fixtures aren't fantastic either. The other thing to consider is he has pulled out of international duty over the international break. And even though I think most of us considered that to be an international break injury, and he'd probably be back by game week 13, Andy Naylor, who is a pretty good Brighton source, says that it's unlikely that he'll feature in game week 13. So that could be an injury doubt as well. So I'm actually going to rate him really harshly at 1 star out of 5, which means that he is probably a sell this week, especially if he is injured as well. And I think there are better options at his price point elsewhere. So I think for the time being, I think you can get rid of him and look elsewhere. Alvarez is a really interesting one, and the data on the surface still looks really good. However, he's only gotten 3 returns in the last 7 game weeks. He is starting to get subbed off a little bit early now. And when you look at the last 6 game weeks, the highest XG per 90 was 0.32, which means that his data is starting to regress. He is playing second fiddle to Haaland, and I think overall, especially considering the fixtures to come, there are probably better options elsewhere. Liverpool, Tottenham and Aston Villa in the next 3 are not easy games. After that, Luton and Palace on the surface are really good games, but what isn't on this ticker at the moment is the blank in game week 18. So are you going to hold him for the next 5 and then for the blank, or are there better options elsewhere that you can hop on now while City have a pretty average run of fixtures and you can chase the upside elsewhere. For that reason, I'm going to rate him 2 stars out of 5, which means I don't think he's a must sell, but I think there are better options elsewhere, and I think you can get rid of him at the moment if you want to. So for those of you who already own Ollie Watkins and Alvarez, then you might be asking, well, who am I even going to sell Alvarez for? Well, Solanke could be one option. At 6.4 million, you could easily afford him as a downgrade. He's very differential at the moment at under 5% ownership. And 3 of the next 5 games, I would say, are really favourable for Bournemouth. And Sheffield United away could be an ideal time to hop onto the likes of Dominic Solanke. Aston Villa at home as well are a team that are conceding a few goals at the moment, so Solanke could benefit from that. And then Crystal Palace away, Man United away, Luton at home. That banker against Luton at home could be a really good fixture for him as well. The underlying XG per 90 is really tasty, and it is increasing week on week at the moment, 0.44. They are getting the best out of him, 2 goals in the last game week. So I'm going to rate him as 4 stars out of 5. I don't think he's a must buy, but he's certainly a very interesting option at the moment if you're looking at a striker. Palmer is going to divide the community slightly this week because he has gotten 4 goals in his last 5 games, but all of them have been penalties, and the underlying data has been bolstered by those penalties. Now, obviously, it's not sustainable that Chelsea is going to get a penalty every single game week, so people are taking that with a little bit of a pinch of salt right now. But even if you remove penalties from the equation, his price at 5.2 million is still great value for money considering the underlying data that is remaining even without the penalties included. So I still think he's going to be fantastic value for money. If we can get that Newcastle game out of the way, I think he'd be as far as a 5-star out of 5 player. But 4 stars for now. I don't think you need to get him right now this game week, but he's certainly top of my wish list. And from next week onwards, he's going to be a very important player to try and squeeze into our sides if possible. So for the time being, 4 out of 5. But from next week onwards, who knows? Could even be the maximum 5. Jarrod Bowen's going to be a really interesting discussion point this week, especially in my team as well, because I've already got him. On the surface, he could even be a captain option away at Burnley, but he has pulled out of England international duty with a minor injury. Now, Southgate said it's nothing serious, but it was enough to keep him out of that North Macedonia match. So I think it's really important to wait for press conference news from David Moyes, because he probably will discuss it in the press conferences as we build up to game week 13. So definitely don't do anything with him yet, but with 4 fixtures out of the next 5 looking really tasty, Burnley, Crystal Palace, Fulham and Wolves, all very good fixtures, Bowen is a player that if it wasn't for this knock, I'd be rating 5 stars out of 5. Because of the slight knock, I think it's important that we wait for the team news, and I'm going to give him 4 stars out of 5 for that reason, because if there is a risk that he could be injured, then obviously we don't want to be purchasing him. But if we get good news midweek, then I think that it's full steam ahead. He's a great option. The data's still great. The fixtures are great. And he's still a great price point. So I'm going to go 4 stars out of 5 for the time being. Kieran Trippier is going to be a really interesting discussion point this week as well, with not amazing fixtures to come. Chelsea, Man United and Tottenham in the next 4 aren't great, and Newcastle do look really stretched at the back, which means that Livramento is quite likely to play at right back whilst Kieran Trippier moves over to a less favourable left back position, and he might also take a more subdued role where Livramento bombs forward on the right a little bit more. So overall, I don't think that he's an absolutely essential pick anymore, despite the fact he's still getting decent data. The fixtures aren't amazing. He is a lot of money at 7 million, so maybe you could find better value elsewhere. However, I don't think he's ever going to be an essential sell, barring injury, of course. So I'm going to give him 3 stars out of 5, which means there could be better value elsewhere. You could use the money wisely to bolster your midfield, for example, and the fixtures do turn good in a few game weeks' time. But for the time being, I don't think that he's an absolute essential hold. So 3 stars out of 5, I think you could find better value elsewhere. So there you have it. Those were the player ratings ahead of the Game Week 13 deadline. Let me know in the comments how you would rate the players that I've had a look at today, whether you disagree or agree with my ratings. And of course, if there are any players I didn't have time to talk about today, leave them in the comments below and I'll give them a rating ahead of the deadline as well. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be really appreciated. It does go a long way and really support me. And I look forward to chatting to you again ahead of the Game Week 13 deadline as we take a look at my team selection on Thursday morning.